the earth is facing away from the sun and seems to be in darkness because it is facing away from the source of light. When it turns round and suddenly the earth is lit up, does the earth turn on that light? Is light suddenly created? Does anything happen to sunlight? No, the sunlight was always shining with the same brightness. It was the earth that turned its back on the light and as a result appeared to go into darkness. So the separate self is like the earth, which seems, from its own illusory point of view, to turn its back on its source. Why? Because the separate self comes into apparent existence when consciousness rises in the form of attention. And the only way consciousness can rise in the form of attention is by ceasing to gaze at itself, by assuming the limitations of the body and therefore becoming a finite mind. And only as that finite mind can it face away from itself. So the return to itself it appears to be the return of a finite self. When the finite self returns to itself and infinite consciousness is revealed, simultaneous with that realization, with that revelation, or this remembering, this recognition, is the separate self never came into existence. There was never any real separate self that left its home, that undertook a sadhana, and that returned to itself. All that was an illusion of an illusion. The primary illusion is personal consciousness, the finite mind. The second illusion is then everything that that finite mind does to retrace its steps back to its origin. And then there is this recognition at some point, I never left home. I have never been, there has never been anything other than infinite consciousness, God's being, knowing itself in all of experience. And that God's infinite being shines in the mind as the experience I am, or I am aware. That is God's signature in the mind. The feeling of peace and happiness is God's footprint in the heart. That is the way, at the human level, God, infinite consciousness, infiltrates the human experience. And that's why there are these two paths elaborated: the path of jnana, following the I am, or the I am aware thought, or the path of bhakti, following love or happiness. If we take either of these feelings, which seem to be very human feelings, we think, I, the human being, am aware. I, the body-mind, am aware. Or the human feeling, I, the body-mind, am happy. If we follow the awareness or the happiness, if we follow them and follow them, we realize we actually fall out of the body-mind. The experience of happiness and the experience of I am aware, they are identical experiences. They are God's being shining in the body-mind. And if we trace either of those experiences, we fall out of the body-mind. We pass out of time into eternity. The I thought, the rising of the finite self, is the portal through which God's being passes in order to become apparently finite and appear as the world, appear as a separate self and an outside world. It is the same portal, the I thought or the feeling of happiness, that the apparently separate self passes through in the other direction, out of time into eternity. So you're right, that to speak of enlightenment is to make a concession, and it is a legitimate concession because most of us feel I am a separate person. So as a compassionate concession to that belief and feeling, the spiritual traditions elaborate various paths to something called enlightenment, which is simply the recognition. It's why it's called a recognition, or the remembrance of God. It is a remembering, not a remembering of something in time, but a remembering of something that everybody knows. The fact that everybody longs for happiness is itself the sign that happiness is the longing for happiness is happiness itself, calling the apparently separate self back into itself. And when the finite self the apparently finite self sinks into its source, collapses into its source, there is this revelation. I was never anything other than that. There was all the time, even in my apparent ignorance, there was only God's infinite being shining. I have never been anything other than that. There is nothing other than that. All of this is only that. And then we cannot even talk about God's infinite being, because infinite means not finite. In other words, God's being is not finite, or consciousness is not finite. But where are all these finite things that we are saying consciousness is not? From consciousness's point of view, there are no finite things to compare itself with. So we cannot even say God's being is infinite, or consciousness is infinite, is prior to either finite or infinite. In fact, we cannot even name it consciousness, because consciousness only means something in relationship to objects. But without the objects, we cannot name that which truly is as anything. And then we fall silent. And that is why the highest teaching, and Ramana Maharshi said this, the highest teaching is silence for that reason. But because his students didn't understand that, he said, okay, I will elaborate these paths for you. I will make a concession. And hence he started speaking. But when we really explore the heart of our experience, we come to this feeling realization, and we cannot speak. My mother knew a painter when she was young called Shatin Sarachi, and she was having a conversation with him in her early days, and he said to her, if there is a God, how do you even dare mention his name? That was so beautiful. The reality of our experience, all there is the reality of our experience. All the names and forms are only this reality, but that reality has no name. The teaching falls silent there.